Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at Valerie Howard's book, Strong Verbs for Fiction Writers. Basically what we're going to do is we're actually going to try and take a look at each individual words and try to reverse what we're looking to do typically in a book. What we're going to be doing is actually, in some of the cases, we're pretty much just going to look at the word and see how we can use that and build a sentence around it to create the idea that we're trying to push out. As always, I will be only going over a little bit about the book, so go check it out for yourself. I will link it in the description below. What's a weak verb? A weak verb is one that's overused, only conveys a shallow meaning, and doesn't bring a powerful image to the mind's eye. The problem is, the weak verbs are usually the ones that pop into our minds first. If we take the idea of a word or a verb that lacks emotional conveyance, and we'll go over this in a little bit, but if we take words, particularly verbs, that have powerful resonance in the minds of our readers, that's what we're looking for here. A strong verb, on the other hand, is a verb that performs three functions. It names the action, tells how the action is performed, it brings up an instant mental image. For example, walk is a weak verb. Sometimes we add adverbs to prop up the verb and kind of help it along. This is a key indication that something's amiss. Sally walked hurriedly across the room. More descriptive, but a bit more cumbersome. Let's use a strong verb in the place of walked hurriedly. Sally scurried across the room. Again, one of the things that we've talked about before is the use of showing versus telling. What we're doing is when we're using stronger verbs is we're showing rather than telling. As always, when we're talking about the difference between showing and telling is that there's going to be a trade-off when we're showing. Showing is always going to be a wordier way of explaining something. Granted, walked hurriedly is going to be more cumbersome than scurried. But what can end up happening is that we have to compensate in other places for the word scurried. We have to create the scene. We have to show beyond just that singular action or that singular word. See the difference? Feel the difference? We have no hint about Sally's emotional state as she walked. In the second example, we understand she walked in a hurried way, but not too explanatory or awkward. In the last example, scurried indicates a frantic hurry, perhaps a little timidity with a mouse-like quality. We have a better picture of what's happening in the scene by changing one word in the sentence. Weak. Harry lightly touched the edge of the book. Stronger. Harry trailed his fingers along the edge of the book. Again, we see the difference, as I'd mentioned before, is that when we're showing, we are using more words. And yes, we are able to connect emotionally to our readers, which is one of the primary points of writing, is to connect with our readers so that they understand what we're trying to tell them. As I've said before, we are translators of the story from our mind to the reader's mind. We are trying to convey not just with the words on the page, but how the words feel in their mind. This is something that's not easy to do and something that takes practice. This is why people say it takes 1,000,000 words before you're even able to actually put together a book. The idea of 1,000,000 words is just practice is something that you have to apply to this type of training or this type of situation. Is we're looking to tell a story in an emotional, compelling way. One of the downsides of telling, and it's not something that I think I've mentioned before, but you can get what's called floating head syndrome. Because they are two people talking and you have very little externality when it comes to the scene and you only have that dialogue, two people talking, and that can drain how a reader is feeling with the book. You want to create a scene that the reader can live in, that the reader can say, hey, I have not only just an understanding of what's going on, which is extremely important, but also I feel as if I'm here watching the scene take place. Now, this is supposed to be done in a way that is not overburdensome for the reader. We don't want to tire out our reader with what we're trying to do, which is why strong verbs shouldn't be overabundant in our writing. This isn't something that we should be doing every single sentence or every single paragraph, but rather something that we are peppering it in, sort of like really good seasoning. You don't over season whatever you're trying to cook, because that becomes everything that is sensed, everything that is tasted by the enjoyer is that the seasoning has to be an addendum to what the story is telling, or what we're trying to take in and what we're trying to enjoy. Karen ran as quickly as she could to her closet. A stronger way of saying this is Karen charged her closet in a panic. Now, personally, I wouldn't necessarily use charge, because what's that implying? That's implying that's an active motion towards something rather than away from something. This is something else we need to keep in mind, is the types of words that we're using not only have a feel to it, but also a direction, and so many other things depending on the word. These are not words that just have a singular emotion tied to what they're trying to say, or singular thought process when it comes to the idea that the word is representing. Typically, emotionally heavy words are laden with all of these signifiers, all of these things that tell us what's going on. Charged is not just a going from one place to another. This isn't a ran quickly towards closet, but rather to something. Now, if the reason why this is set up this way is Karen is charging the closet because she is trying to get something at the closet. So say she's in a situation where she's on the phone and she says something embarrassing, and her brother is in the closet and he's snickering. This is something that she would be charging it in a panic because she said something that she didn't want her brother to hear about. This is the type of mindset that we'll have to create around this phrase or this sentence, is that she's charging it for a reason. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to how we're using these words, not just the fact that we are swapping out words. This isn't a thesaurus that we're looking to do here. We aren't trying to take a word where it's similar, because if we take a word that's similar but ignore the emotional aspects of that word, we can make it very confusing for our reader. And we'll go into it a little bit later with the words that I've chosen. I might or may not go over more words in the next video. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do. Now we're going to go over a couple of different words and swap out the word ask. And we're going to go through a number of different words that we can use and substitute, and try to come up with phrases that we can use to use that in a way that it makes sense. So, gently, request. Terrence requested that so-and-so or that Tommy does this. More urgently, this is a scene where we're gently, this is the first time Terrence is asking for something. Urgently, something a little bit more important. Terrence implored that Tommy does something. Now, typically, this depends on where the scene is. To implore somebody is not something you would see necessarily in an office facility. The word implore has a specific connotation, has a specific old-timey feel to it. One of the ways we can think about it is sometimes foods have a mouthfeel, or how the consistency of the food feels in the mouth of the person eating it. In that same way, each word has a specific brain feel and expectation of what it's trying to say. You don't say implore if you are trying to convey a more modern telling of a situation. It is more of an older version of saying begging. These are words that they're similar, but implore has a very specific connotation. Forcefully ask. This is somebody who is interrogating them. This is something where we don't just use this in a scene with cops and detectives, but rather a parent will interrogate their child. A girlfriend will interrogate her boyfriend. These are ways that we can show there's not just a, hey, I need information, but rather there is somebody's done something wrong. There's an implication that somebody has done something wrong. So therefore, I am going to say interrogate, because I want the reader to understand that this is a emotional asking, a heavy emotion in the situation. Break, as in breaking apart, breaking into tiny pieces. Crumble versus mash. Crumble means is that there is still bits and pieces that are seen. Mash is more of a mushy texture in our mind in the way that we see it. We see it not just as pebbles with mash, or with liquid-like state with crumble. These are two different ideas and two different things that we're trying to say. Now, when we're trying to use these as simile, we need to make sure that we are being consistent. For instance, if we say mashed my heart, that doesn't necessarily imply a cracking, a breaking apart, a crumbling of an idea or crumbling of the heart. That's a harsher way of seeing it. If we say mash, he mashed my heart, that is something a little bit different, because that implies is that there is flexibility with what's going on in large pieces. Cracked, fracture. Now we have cracked, which is there is a beginning of a breaking in large pieces. A fracture is a break, but you have two not complete destruction as you would see with the tiny pieces. You're seeing, so for crack, there is a crack in the trust between two friends, or there's a fracture. With a crack, there can be mending. You see this, it's the same idea that we see with broken bones. There's a crack in the bone, or there's a fracture, which is a bigger crack, an actual separation. Though there might still be touching, that fracture is a break. And that's something we can use in our emotional tells between two characters when there's a fracturing of their relationship. There's a crack versus fracture. These are all different ways we can use these words. Beyond repair, atomize or pulverize. Atomize is one of those ones where it is a breaking apart, where it is not necessarily an idea of somebody atomizing it, but rather something set it off, like an explosion will atomize something. Pulverize definitely for me indicates that somebody is beating something up. Somebody is doing the pulverizing to create the destruction. Explosively, they bursts apart. These are breaking, that is breaking from the inside out. My heart burst. Pieces chipped off. Pieces off. Chipped. A piece of my shoulder chipped off. I chipped the table. These are things that we can use that is giving a more concrete feel of the scene, and not just giving us a visual, but also an emotional expectation of what the reader should be feeling. Illegally. These are ways that we can imply or create a scene with the words that we use. In a courtroom, using illegally style words such as deface or vandalize, is that we are giving a more technical term to help create the feeling, that mouthfeel of a courtroom scene or a technical scene where we are using very clinical terms. So deface and vandalize, while yes, there is an emotional tell with those words, there's also a clinical feeling to these words. Run, as in a type of liquid. Slow speed. Ooze or seep. You see this if you have like trees, they will ooze. Cuts will ooze. These are not necessarily where we're talking about water, but rather a viscous-like item, a viscous-like slow meandering speed. Whereas with moderate speed, we're talking a splash, something where you have a child that's in the tub splashing about, where it's not getting water everywhere. But we are also seeing that we are creating a haphazardness with this speed. Now a stream is a lot less haphazard, but it's a lot more straightforward. It's a lot more purposeful. Now stream can be used as there's a stream of water. Now is it being propelled by something? Is somebody pushing out water and creating a stream? These are things that we can use to help create the scene for us. High speed, gush or jet. This is where there's a very narrow spot that the water's being pushed through. Gush means typically a lot of water is going out in a high speed where you have a gushing amount of water, whereas a jet, it's a lot higher, even higher than gush. These are different levels that we can use. My heart gushed for them. There is a feeling of emotional energy or love that's being flown out when we use a word like gush in different conjunctions, such as heart. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on with here is carry, heavy load, heft, lug, or schlep. One of the things I want to mention in this particular one is make sure that we're paying attention to the types of words that we are using for our story, because what can end up happening is we use words that our reader's not going to truly understand. Using a word like schlep, while I'm familiar with that, there might be some that are not. The problem is that what we can end up doing, and this is one of the downsides of a thesaurus, is that we think it's going to make us look more intelligent. That is always going to be the bad case. That is always going to be the wrong choice, because we are not trying to look intelligent. We are not trying to say, look at me, look what I can do, I'm smart. If you are trying to tell people you're smart, you're not. That's always the rule. That will always be the case. Like I always say, you are trying to create connections. And when you use words like schlep for like moving a heavy load, is going to create a distance because not everybody is going to know offhand what it means. Same in when we're talking trowel. I'm not familiar with the word trowel. Now, an addendum or a caveat to this mindset is that is the word common in the writings that you are typically reading for your genre? For instance, you're going to find words that are a lot more common in your genre that are not going to be common in other places. So if you have words that are particular to the subgenre or the genre that you're writing in, and people who are expected to read it are those readers, that's the type of words that you could use to even create a deeper connection with your readers, because they already have a preconceived understanding of what that is and what those words are trying to convey. Other strong verbs. We'll just go over a list of 21s that I have. Alarm, boot, congregate, drench, electrify, elicit, evoke, fester, flaunt, gag, ignite, muster, pave, punt, radiate, roast, salivate, slander, smear, tax, thrill, validate. These are all words that we can use to add depth to our stories and add a understanding of what's going on in our stories by using the right words in the right spots. We should always be reading and we should always be trying to find better ways of telling the words that we're trying to do. But like I said earlier, make sure you're using the right word for what you're trying to say, not the big one, not the one that's flashy, not the one that is going to make you seem something that you're not. You cannot write beyond your capability. That's just how life works. What you can do is grow your ability so that those words that you use make sense. There are ways of using words that are not necessarily common, but with enough context clues, your readers will understand what you're trying to say. And that's something that we can use later on in our stories after we've already established a pattern of storytelling for our readers so that they understand how the story is supposed to be going. These are not things we do at the beginning of the story. We want to make sure that we're creating those connections earlier on so that when we change things up, when we tell the story in a slightly different way, or we use different tells in our emotional expressions, we're telling it in so much better way than just this person did this person did that. We are using the emotional tells to convey connections. So to recap, one of the things I want to make sure that we're getting across here is that these are not just words that we are just talking about as disconnected ideas out in the ether. These are real hard words that we are able to put into our story so that we are able to tell these stories in a better way, in a deeper way, to create those connections with our readers. It doesn't matter the type of reader or how many readers you have or if your story is popular, but how deep is that connection between you and your reader? That story that you're telling, is it emotionally connecting with your readers? Are your characters feeling as if they are live, present in the story? That your reader is watching the situation take place? That they aren't even recognizing that they're reading? That is the ultimate goal of a writer, is to create these stories that we are emotionally touching our readers so that they come away with a better understanding of reality. All right, that's all I had for today. As always, I will be linking all the resources I use in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave it in the comments. Until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.